Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Something About Kanban, Improving Projects with a Card and a Wall. My name is Andy Jordan. I'm the president of Refensium Consulting, and I'm going to be presenting and moderating today. I am joined by three other gentlemen whose faces you can see there, and I'll just ask them to briefly introduce themselves so you can sort of get used to who they are and those voices. So, Hector, let's start with you, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hector Molina. I am with East Carolina University. I am the Director of Client Engagement. So my area of focus within the IT organization is I manage the PMO, our help desk, our desktop support, classroom technologies, communications team, and then also our learning platforms team. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks, Hector. And Andrew, you're next in the slide, so I'll get you to say hi.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, certainly. So Andrew Graff, I run product strategy for Team Dynamics. We're a commercial software company focused on project portfolio management and service management, and just work to ensure that we understand what the market needs and make sure we deliver. And Kanban is really, really important to us because we've seen a lot of clients adopt it over the last several years. So really looking forward to this.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And last but by no means least, Barry.
Hello, everyone. Barry Cousins here from the Infotech Research Group. I run the research practice around project, portfolio, and organizational change management.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Barry. And you'll be hearing from those three gentlemen a lot as we go through. Let me move on. There's the agenda. I'm not going to run through all of that because you can read just as well as I can. And as you can see, there's a lot of content. So I'm going to move through this as quickly as we can. We are also going to have a polling question or two as we go. So I'm just going to let you know when we get to that point and tell you how to handle it, but be ready for that. We'll have time for questions at the end, as you can see. So if you want to ask any questions, please feel free to put those into the panel in your GoToWebinar console, and we'll get to as many as we can. And anticipating some of those questions, yes, we are recording this, and a link will be sent to get access to the recording before 24 hours are up at the end of this registration, sorry, the end of this presentation. That will also include a link to a copy of the slides, so you'll be able to get access to that. And in addition, this is eligible for PDUs, and I will give you all the information you need to plan the PDUs before the top of the hour at the end of this presentation. So if there's any more questions right now, throw them into the console, but I think we're good to go. So let's talk a little bit about projects, and in particular, what is it that makes projects successful? Well, if you ask most people who work on teams, or most project managers, or most stakeholders, they're going to talk about relationships. They're going to talk about trust between team members and between team members and management. They're going to talk about knowledge and comprehension, understanding, not just knowing what's going on, but knowing why. And then they're going to talk about collaboration and commitment. And really and truly, all of that comes down to effective communication. That's really what this is about. Projects succeed when there is communication that is effective between all of the people involved. And as I'm sure most of you are aware, they can fail miserably if any of that stuff is missing. So let's go straight into a polling question. I promised you they were coming. So here is the first of them. And I'm just going to launch that. So you should see it appear on your screen now. And I'm simply asking, as you can see, how do you rank your organization? You can read the rest. So while everybody is sort of thinking through that, everybody's sort of reading through the options and saying very poor through to the very good options. We intake, plan, and track well. Give you all a little bit of time to talk to that. And I'm going to bring in Hector and say, Hector, do you think everyone's going to say they're exceptionally good at this, though we know how to plan our projects, so we know what we're doing, everything's great? Or do you think maybe there's a few opportunities for improvement now?
Yeah, I think if I had to guess, I would say most of us would be middle of the road. Sometimes we get it right. I think there's certainly situations where the communication is spot on, maybe for some of these smaller initiatives, but for these larger projects, maybe there's a lot more complexity in how we engage in our communication with our stakeholders, whether internal or external to the project.
Yeah, I think you could be right, and I'll let people know. I'll freely admit I get to see a preview of the results, and I think most of you will say that there is some room for improvement. So I'm just going to leave it there for a few more seconds. So if you haven't voted yet and you want to, get that vote in now. So I'm going to close it very, very quickly. And I'm going to close it now, and I'm just going to share the results. And there you go. So you can see just over half of you, 54%, taking that middle ground. Sometimes we get it right. 24% saying, well, we're good at it. We're good at tracking. And 5% saying, yeah, we intake plan track really well. So that's sort of a nice bias towards the positive side. But, you know, option 1 and option 2 got 16% between them. So that's still, what, 1 in 6 of you. So that's not great. You know, that's still a lot of room for improvement there. Now, I'm pleased to see that only 2%, only 1 in 50 of you chose very, very poor. So that's a good sign, but there's room for improvement. No real surprise, I guess. Let me hide that and go straight back onto the content here. And this is our first panel question. So this is a chance for me to shut up and you can hear the intelligent people speak. So our first panel question, you can see it there as well as I can. What makes project work so difficult at times? What are the primary barriers? Hector, I know that you live and breathe this stuff every day. So let me throw it to you first and get your thoughts.
Right. So to kind of answer the first question, at least from my experience in the organization I kind of live in today, probably the first one is poorly defined goals or objectives for projects. Not having really defined requirements or well-defined requirements is certainly an inhibitor. Also, I think too, unrealistic deadlines. So timing, scheduling pressures, all those kind of combine to, you know, especially if you're in an environment where the priorities are frequently changing. So your environment is dynamic. And then also to the lack of resources or insufficient team skills that are required for the project. As it relates to the second part of this question, I think for us, it depends on the scale and complexity of the initiative. Sometimes we find where there's a resistance to change just because project work is just generally hard. So, you know, embedding some type of organizational change management practice helps, at least with the execution and getting the word out and improving the communication. I think one common theme within my organization is that there is this conception or misperception that project management in general is just a cumbersome process. It's artifact intensive, takes too much time and emphasis away from actually getting stuff done. And maybe there's some legitimacy in that sentiment, but I do think it comes down to how do you decide the rigor of your project management methodology based on the project or initiative. So for example, right, if you're working on a project that's going to take 160 hours to do, do you need a 15-page or a 20-page charter for that type of effort? And probably not. So I think that plays into it as well. Some main barriers again for us are, you know, the maturity of our project management, just general understanding, poor planning, lack of prioritization, and limited resources seem to be the biggest barriers.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sure that most of our audience will be able to relate to at least some, if not all of those as being challenges on their own projects. Barry, anything else that you're seeing in addition to that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly support and agree with everything Hector just said. I would add, if I'm looking across the broad spectrum, it's weak sponsorship that I would add to that pile. So when there is a committed sponsor who is actually publicly committed to the outcomes of a project, then a lot of those other things tend to get solved. Things like resourcing, clarity of requirements, scope control, and all those good things. When we've got too many projects and it's not clear who's actually on the hook for them at an executive level, then I think it opens the door to a lot of these other problems to leak in.
Yep, yeah, agreed. Andrew, any final thoughts? Sorry, I didn't give you many options there because Hector and Barry came up with so many.
Sure. I definitely agree with the other panelists, and I'll add a couple things. I think that, and these might be a little more tactical, but just the blocking and tackling of basic project management, especially today with work from home, and I think that trend is going to continue. It's very easy to lose touch. So we see one of the fundamental weaknesses consistently is running a regular and effective status meeting where people are talking about not only what they've gotten done, but hey, what did we not get done? I think there's also fear about communicating about failure, right? So project managers get blindsided. So creating an environment of trust is something we see as lacking in many cases. You know, there's been some psychological studies done that someone would rather take one big embarrassing embarrassing beating rather than every single week. So they'll hold that problem until the very end. They just can't hide it anymore. And then it tanks your project. So I think that's something that can be done. The other thing that we see is a consistent lack of contingency. So some of the issues that Barry and Hector talked about, especially with weak sponsorship or lack of commitment, the use of contingency is a project manager's weapon to still get things done on time. And so the higher the level of uncertainty, or the less the strength of the sponsor, the higher the contingency. And 20 to 30 to 40% contingency is not unreasonable if there are so many uncertainties, the requirements and expectations. So we consistently see project managers scheduling down to an almost perfect scenario, right? Where I think that there's a huge opportunity to use contingency to combat some of this stuff as well.
Yeah, no one tells the problems that there's no contingency been allowed for dealing with problems. They're going to hit you anyway, whether you allow for it or not. Right. So you may as well plan.
That's right.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Let's go back to the content and let's talk a little bit about some of the common areas of breakdown. And you've heard of, I think, pretty much all of these. So everything from conflicting priorities there to lack of clarity, the shift in scope, not enough time, complexity of the approach that we use. And that's sort of to Hector's point. Why do we need a 15-page charter if we're just doing a 3 people, 4 people for a week or so? There's a lot of jargon, and you're going to see in a minute. That's why we're going to try and break that down. Problems with the scoping, too many channels, and of course you've heard about sponsors and stakeholders and contingency and all the rest of that stuff. There's a million different things we could put around this this circle if only PowerPoint had enough circles to let us. But it doesn't have to be like this. There has to be a better way, and guess what? There is. Kanban, a card and a wall. And we're going to call this a card wall, because really, why would we say jargon can be a problem and then talk about Kanban, which, I'm fairly certain none of you have been out with your friends on a Friday night, and well, none of you have been out with your friends on a Friday night for the last little while, but and talked about Kanban. It's just not going to happen. So let's use simple terms that we can all relate to, a card wall. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail and talk about what a card wall is as we get through this presentation. And we're going to talk about software here, because I recognize that, me sitting here and saying it's as easy as a card and a wall, or a sticky note and a wall, it's not so easy when you're not all in a shared office space with walls convenient. So we'll talk about that as well. But don't get hung up on this having to be complex. It really is as simple as sticky notes and somewhere to put those sticky notes, whether those are real or virtual. That can make revolutionary improvements to your project. I'm not kidding, and we're going to talk about that as we go through. But now let me bring back in the experts here. And before we start talking about the details, let's talk about the users. And Hector, I know you use card walls a lot. In East Carolina, who is it that's using the card wall? What types of people are actually taking advantage of this functionality?
Yeah, since card walls give you the freedom to map your own workflow or life cycle, we have many different units using card walls, from our HR, marketing, IT, athletics, even academic colleges and departments, and even our medical school leveraging its use. So mapping the workflow that's unique to those teams has really supported the adoption with those teams and departments to easily see the status of the work that they have in progress.
And that broader base really speaks to how intuitive and easy this concept is for people to grab hold of and use.
That is correct.
Andrew, what do you see? Who's using this in your experience?
Sure. So obviously the traditional Agile and Scrum-based methodology teams use the card wall format extensively, but I think that's kind of the easy group to target. What we're seeing is huge uptake amongst novice project managers, or the anti-project manager. Someone says, I don't believe in project management, but I sure like to track and get things done. We see that that's a much easier transition to project management, and people who feel as though a waterfall type structure is overkill. Those teams, when they're asked to manage projects, especially now when visibility is so much more difficult, more teams are being asked to track their projects. It's been a much easier switch for the novice PMs and those more operationally minded teams to look at a card wall and say, oh, I get it. I got this stuff over here that's queued up. I've got this stuff here that's in process, and I've got this stuff over here that's either done or in review. We just see a huge uptake amongst those novice groups. And I also think too that we see teams who are very operationally focused. So forgive me, this is a little bit product related, but as teams are taking requests for change and they're managing tier three support, and they have operational work, card-walls are a nice way to take all of that work and just put it in queues. So as a manager, I can see operationally, these are the widgets that we're going to address today. These are the widgets we're going to address tomorrow. And here's the status of the widgets. And here's the workload of the team. So I think operationally focused teams benefit tremendously too.
Perfect, thank you. So Barry, to paraphrase what Hector and Andrew have said, everybody can use it for everything. So good luck coming up with some new user groups for this, but I'm going to get you to share your thoughts as well.
Well, you know, the one thing I would add is we've seen this really take off, obviously, with our customer base, maybe in the last 18 months. But if we go back about 5 years, Infotex management dictated that everybody was going to do a morning stand-up, and likely they were all going to be card walls, and they would literally walk the buildings between, say, 8:30 and 9:30 and jump in and participate at will. And I would say that helped the adoption tremendously.
Yeah, perfect. That's a really good idea. Thank you. All right. What's a card wall? We talked about it. We talked about who uses it. Let's talk about a card wall. So what you see on your screen right now is effectively the framework of a card wall. I haven't simplified this. I haven't dumbed it down in order to get it to fit onto a PowerPoint slide. You just need to create 3 categories: not started, in progress, in process if you prefer, or complete, or ready for review, or whatever. You can add more columns if you want. You can add more swim lanes to this if you want to have more. But essentially, this is how you can start a nice, simple, basic framework. And then what you do is you create a card. You've got your wall, now you need a card. And we use a card for each task that has to be completed. And really and truly, it can be as simple as you see there. Design the screens. Okay, that's it. You can add more detail. We'll talk about some of that. But this is a card wall. And then you put your cards on your wall. So you can see immediately, just with what I've shown you, if you put design screens in not started, then we know that work hasn't been done. If we put it in progress, we know someone is designing the screens. We may need to know more, but at least that gives us some information. And if it's complete, well, then we know the screens have been designed, or they're ready for review, or whatever it is that you want to call that final column. Based on what's going on in your project and based on all the different tasks having a card or sticky note or whatever you want to use, then you can see instantly what's going on in the project, where things are, and of course you move things as the project proceeds, as it moves forward. So it's a really simple way of communicating. It's a simple way of managing, and we'll talk about how we can turn this more into a management tool as we go. But this is as simple as it can be. And you don't need training on this. You don't need to be a project management guru or expert on this. This is why this kind of stuff is so popular among accidental or not usual project managers, people who just manage the occasional project sort of unofficially or whatever it might be, because it's simple. But at the same time, this is popular with chief executives and the C-suite because they don't need to spend weeks getting into the details to understand what's going on. They can look at this and quickly see what's happening. And if we have ways, and we'll talk about it, of how you show changes, then they can see what's moving. And it's so powerful and it's so simple to maintain. You're not spending hours a week updating this. It's really, really that simple and that powerful. It really couldn't be any simpler, right? It's easy to understand, it's easy to produce, it's easy to maintain, but Team Dynamics did a recent survey and found that only 13.5% of respondents, so a little more than 1 in 8, are using Kanban card walls. Why is that? Well, we believe it's simply a lack of awareness. That's why we're doing this presentation now. We want you to understand what card walls are, how they can help you, and how they can help your organization succeed and be more effective and efficient, because that's really what it's about. And trust me, I know we're 20 minutes in, but we're barely getting started on this stuff. There's a lot more to it. So before I get into the details of what there is beyond this, let's bring Hector back in and say, Hector, give us an idea at East Carolina University of a typical project that you may tackle with card wall. And I know you use it in so many different instances that typical might be difficult, but.
Yeah, so this certainly varies depending on the unit within the organization. But as an example of a current use case I'll share, our university is embarking on kind of what we call an enrollment management initiative, which has been broken up to about 8 sub-teams. But this team is mostly built of senior leaders, so chancellor, cabinet level individuals. I guess I'll call them the anti-PM, as Andrew mentioned, within the organization. And we needed to leverage the use of a card wall to support the ability to split the work into specific categories. We broadened it outside of the 3 that you just showed us, but very specific to the life cycle of the work that needed to be done. But what it did, it helped us to understand, what was in progress, what had been completed, and then what needs to be done in the future. And it has and continues to support the senior leaders and team in providing really a clear way of visualizing, again, what's been done, what needs to be done in the future, ensuring that we're all on the same page. So it's been highly successful.
Excellent, thank you. Barry, I left you to last time, so let's bring you in next here. And what do you see? What's a typical project in your experience?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that, and I want to actually leave a wide, road for Andrew to drive in here. So I'm actually going to talk about my own projects. We're actually using card walls to design major publications, and it'll end up being that there's a card for every slide that goes in the slide deck at the end, and a card for every tool that gets produced, and every dominant point of view that my researchers come up with. And what we're finding is that we can actually lay this thing out in a card wall like this. And if we do that, then a whole bunch of the things that people would have written slides about before never turn into cards. So as a planning tool, it's better for us. And then ultimately we can develop that way and assign work around between people. So we're literally designing major publications with the card wall.
Excellent, and that really shows just how powerful it is. And I'm glad you shared your projects, because Barry, we all know it's all about Barry. The rest of us are just here to support. And Andrew, please support Barry as best you can. What's a typical project?
Sure.
I know it's so many different businesses, but what do you think?
So I talked a little bit in the last section about that operational work, where it's just work that we need to get done. We're processing things like a factory. I think that's a big use for it. But we see software development initiatives. We see, and I'll give you some personal examples as well, product go lives, version upgrades, things like that. We manage in a card wall, and the types of initiatives we find that are really effective for it are teams where we could pretty easily sit down and say, okay, what are the things we're going to need to complete to finish this project? And we can throw those up on that first column, right? And as a team, if we work collaboratively together, we can prioritize those things and make sure they move through their life cycles. One of the things that we use it for quite a bit are organizational improvement initiatives, where we can essentially use the order of cards and color shading of cards as priorities to say, okay, as teams, right, we have the work that we need to do to deliver day to day, but we want to improve our organization. So we'll use a card wall to visualize, here are our priorities and what we're currently working on, not in our day to day, but to improve the organization as a whole. Right? The card wall is perfect for that type of initiative.
Perfect, thank you. All right, now let's talk about software, because it's all very well for me standing here or sitting here and saying, you should put cards on the wall, but we're all working from remote locations. Most of us working from home right now. We're not in an office environment where we can put things on the wall. And while that can be powerful, as Barry said, you have people literally walking around and going to the different stand-ups. If we start leveraging software, then we can achieve so much more. Because at the most basic level, a Post-it note on a wall can only convey so much. When you start making that an electronic Post-it note on an electronic wall, then you can actually get all kinds of additional advantage. You can start assigning specific owners to a specific task. So each card, each item has an owner. You can add more columns very easily, and if you want to add columns in the middle partway through, then that becomes a lot easier to do. You can categorize work. You can use color coding or some way of labeling, or different shapes even potentially, in order some sort of icon to indicate different types of work. You can look at different views of this cardboard by rearranging based on different characteristics, not just whether it's in progress or done or waiting for review or whatever it might be. There's all kinds of ways that you can do this because you are effectively unlimited. I've seen a lot of organizations that do different layers, different levels to this, so you can have additional information, or it's like flipping over the top level and seeing what's going on underneath it. There is no end to what you can do. When you start leveraging software, which at the moment when we're looking to work remotely and looking to collaborate electronically becomes so critically important, you can achieve so much more than if you're just physically sticking things on a wall. The virtual, the electronic wall becomes a lot more. Here's some examples. It becomes a lot easier to enforce WIP, work in progress limits. So you can say in a project team, and this is a fairly common approach with this kind of technique, is say, okay, we cannot have more than X, more than 3, more than 8, whatever it might be, tasks in progress at the same time, because then you run the risk of people becoming too spread out, trying to focus on too many things get lost or abandoned, you don't get the work done, you have dependencies sitting there. So you can actually start using the software to manage that and enforce rules that won't allow you to move things into in progress until other things have been moved out. You can do that at a project level, you can do that at an individual level, you can do it at a team level. There's lots of different ways that you can handle that. But that's something that moves this immediately from communication to management. We're helping now to support an effective delivery of the project. It becomes much easier to identify dependencies. We can identify related tasks and we can see what's happening and okay, which tasks haven't started, which ones are complete, where are we being held up, and what is it that's going on? And we can do different types of relationships there for the different dependencies. It becomes so much easier to see what's going on. And you can see just very quickly here how you start to understand more depth and more detail without losing any of that simplicity, without losing any of that essential basic cards on a wall look and feel, that easy to understand. And then we start driving productivity. We start looking now beyond this idea of just, doing stuff to look at it and say that's what's going on. We're actually doing stuff to make us better at what we do. We're focusing on the work. We're making sure that we're going to get the projects delivered as effectively and efficiently as we can. We don't do today projects in just certain areas today. Everywhere, every department has to do projects at some point. It may not be their core business. They may only do 1 or 2 a year, but everyone is doing projects right now because of the COVID-19 thing. Everyone's figuring out how to deal with that. And at some point, everyone's going to have to do some kind of recovery projects. There's projects happening everywhere. But for a lot of those areas, it's not core business. It's only something occasional. They don't want to focus on learning how to be a project manager. They just want to get the work done. They don't want to write these 15-page charters. I apologize. The duct tape came off the dog's mouth. We'll deal with that. I'm sorry. That was a joke. If anyone there is looking after animal welfare. We need to make sure the work actually gets done. And traditional project management approaches don't work. They don't achieve that because they're too process heavy. They're too slow. They're too paper intensive. Agile is a way to try and deal with that, but that doesn't work for people who only manage projects occasionally either, because you have to be trained and skilled and have that knowledge of how to understand and use Agile. But chemicals legitimately are different from that. They really are a very different way of looking at work. So now let me bring in a second polling question and get your thoughts on this. So also give me a chance to go on mute for a second and deal with this. So what's the biggest benefit that card walls have for you? What do you think? So you see the poll now and give you a few seconds to read through the options. And I know we cheated a little bit because we gave you an all of the above option, but just read through and tell us what you think. And Barry, let me bring you in this time and ask you what you think we might see for people responding to this. And I know they're all going to say all of the above, but give us some thoughts.
I'm going to guess simpler approach, because I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. And after you've done this for a little while, I'm certainly left with that feeling every time we go through it. It's like, man, this is simple. It's a lot simpler than the planning constructs that we're doing in more formal projects.
Yeah,
I would agree, Barry. I think simpler approach is probably the selection I think I would choose.
Yep, me too.
All right. Well, I can sort of see the results that are coming in. So I don't think anyone's going to be disappointed with what they projected, but we'll give everyone just a little bit more time to vote. It looks like most of you have voted now, so I'm just going to close it down and just share the results. And yeah, my fault. I gave you an all of the above option, so just over half of you took that. But look at those other results. So 34% of you said simpler approach, which is to Hector and Barry's point, what they suggested. 11% said mixed communication more effective. And then just 4% easier communication, 1% just, hey, it's a better approach. So no real surprise there. All of the above being a popular one, followed by the simpler approach. All right, let me close that down. There will be one more polling question before the end, but let's go back to the slides. And let's talk a little bit about, some of the benefits that we have here. Some of the easier, some of the advantages, some of the benefits we get from this. So yes, it is intuitive. You don't need to be trained. As soon as I showed you what a card will look like, you got it, right? It makes sense. It is simple. We just talked about that from the polling question. It conveys a lot of information. It's something that is easy to access, even when it's on software. It doesn't need to be guarded behind stuff. It doesn't need to be sort of trained or help files to get access to it and see what's going on. But at the same time, it's delivering value. And of course, it's saving you time and effort and allowing you to focus on what matters, which is getting the freaking work done. Nobody wants to spend time reporting. They want to get the work done. And card walls are just an efficient way of working. All right, so Hector, let's bring you back in. And let's talk a little bit about the experience you had in actually implementing this. What was the adoption process? What did you do within the university in order to introduce the concept and gain adoption of card walls?
Yeah, so one of the major points I like to share with units across the university who may be considering using card walls or Kanban is that Kanban, it doesn't prescribe a way of managing work, right? There's no predefined sprints. It doesn't even dictate regular meetings or even create specific roles within teams, but it really is built to help with the visualization of a team's work, right? So they get a better understanding of what their workflow is. And so by doing this, I think it helps them get better organized and manage their work more efficiently. And obviously, the end result really is to help them manage and track their projects and the tasks within much easier. That said, I do reiterate that simply putting a bunch of cards on the wall doesn't mean you're using the card wall effectively or even Kanban practices. I think there's a few things that I kind of try to reiterate when we're trying to do adoption is, one is, the visualization of the work, meaning, what represents all the stages within their work, and it's going to be different based on the unit within the organization. So we don't rely on some predetermined template when we go through these adoptions within these various units, but we try to custom build them based on the team or the unit that's going to use it. And then we also help them understand that there's a process for the prioritization of the work to be done, right? So you have this backlog, and this is where they need to be pulling their work from as they go forward, right? So understanding that process and what that looks like. And then making sure that they're limiting the amount of work that's in progress. You don't want to see a bunch of stuff that's in progress. You really want them to kind of limit that work in progress so they can be more effective in completing those said tasks. I think one of the golden rules that I just, again, try to reiterate with them is, you don't want a bunch of things all in progress. I think it's counterproductive, in my opinion. So really to be effective, you got to manage that. And so that's, I think as long as I articulate that to the units that are attempting to adopt card walls, they get a better grasp and adoption of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And that ability to tailor the columns, the swim lanes to the needs of each individual group, that makes it so much easier for people to buy into the concept because they see something that is relevant to them as opposed to that just generic approach that doesn't really fit anybody's needs.
Exactly.
Andrew, is that fairly typical from what you see, that that's a similar adoption process that is used by most organizations?
I think it is. It is from our experience. I will add that if the context is there's an organization looking to implement card walls as a tool or Kanban as a tool, what we have found to be most successful in the institutions that are most successful implementing it are really starting with the teams that have the most pronounced pain, because it's easy to convince somebody to try a remedy if they're having pains that remedy can fix. So we've seen the best adoption where the organization starts communicating about it. They go find the teams that are most likely to get benefit from it, train them, work with them, and then those teams start showing the rest of the organization how much better things can be. So if you're having trouble getting these concepts rolling, I think that approach can be very, very effective.
Absolutely. Barry, what did you go through, or what have you seen working for this?
Well, certainly having the executives prowl around in the morning helped to drive adoption, but on a more serious note, long term, that doesn't stick, you know, the executive thing. What sticks is when we have a curator. I know that that's probably the least exciting part of it, but over time, we're going to have this Kanban board, a card wall with a lot of things on it. And having a curator actually making sure that things aren't going stale in there, that we're sticking with the principles behind it, really helps to drive adoption. And every time I've seen this, concept of a curator, and I'm trying not to say scrum master because I'm just talking about purely the idea of maintaining the information on it. As soon as we look at something that made it into the middle column, to Hector's point earlier, and we say, well, it's okay if it didn't get started, let's move it back to the left. As soon as people see our willingness to move it back to the left, they get relaxed. They know that they're not going to have to carry the wrong burden around just because something we thought was starting. And then adoption really sticks because people start to trust the process, because they really begin to realize that this card wall represents what we've agreed to achieve. And it's not about, you know, just sticking people with things. It's not about trying to push more work through. Right sizing, as both Hector and Andrew have said, there's some right number of cards on there per person. And for me, it's one. I rarely win that fight, but I'd like to see one thing per person. And if I can keep that to a minimum and really curate it and make sure it's accurate, then people like it.
I'm with you on the one, but then all four of us are men, so we know we're not very good at multitasking. But I think that curator role is really important. People need to understand that this isn't about competition. It's not about trying to show how many things you can do or how fast you can move them through. It's about an accurate reflection of what's going on, and having someone who is overseeing the card wall and making sure that it's an accurate reflection of what's going on is really important. And to your point, it does drive effective adoption. All right, let's get back to the content, and there's more. Let's go and talk a little bit about Kanban as the thing that sits underneath this. Kanban, and the reason it's a bit of a weird word is because it's from the Japanese. The concept was developed by Toyota in the 1940s as part of something called the Toyota Way, which was their approach to virtually every element of business. So it's not a new thing. We see it a lot on agile projects, and Barry said, you know, he doesn't want to call a curator a Scrum Master. Scrum Master is obviously very specific to agile. But because this has been around for so much longer than agile as we know it today, the Agile Manifesto was written in 2001. So we're well into the Kanban life by the time agile came along. And it is becoming an increasingly popular communications tool within waterfall teams, traditional project management teams. But as we talked a little bit about as we go through, this is also something that is very easy for people to adopt and to get up to speed with if they're only occasional project managers. There's a very low barrier to entry. There's no specialist training or education needed on how to do this, and either for the PM or for the administrator, the curator, or for anyone who's working in the team. You know, it's easy to start using this in the right way and improving the quality of the project that's being delivered. Because we have this common language, it's also now a lot easier for PMOs who oversee projects of all different types across all different areas of the organization So they can now communicate progress. There's a common language coming in project reporting. There can be a common language going out when the PMO reports to the enterprise on what's going well, what's not, where we may need to make adjustments, whether that's to current projects or future plans or whatever it might be. It's actually helping the PMO stakeholders to understand what's going on a little bit better. And it's also helping all of those teams. I did these arrows going into the PMO, but they could easily be two-way arrows. So the PMO will have a much easier time communicating with all of its stakeholders, not just those traditional waterfall stakeholders that we tend to think of with PMOs, but we don't have to necessarily have a completely separate agile PMO that then has to translate to the enterprise PMO. And those projects that fall outside of traditional PMO remits, the occasional, the accidental projects, they can be included as well, and we get a much more accurate picture of what's really going on, which is really what it's all about. And getting started on this, it really couldn't be easier. I mean, you should be able to get that sense already, right? You can start with one team, you can start with one project. You can set up a basic card wall, whether that's software or a physical one, if you have the opportunity to work in a shared environment right now. Spend an hour getting it set up the way it should be, giving the right number of columns, giving them the right headings, put the right cards in there. Then start using it and gain feedback and refine what you use to suit the needs of all those stakeholders. Then go through some kind of formal review process, and I really guarantee people will love this. They may say it will be even better if, and come up with ways to improve it, but that shows engagement. That shows that they're actually committed to the process and want to make it as good as it can be. Once you've had that review process, refine the approach, expand it to more projects, and then when you want to scale this, make sure you've got the right software partner, not just the right piece of software. You don't want to go and just download some widget and hope it works, because this is going to scale beyond one group and one team, but it's also going to scale beyond just card walls, beyond Kanban, and start getting into more formal, larger scale project delivery as well. You don't want something that is completely separate. You want something that is completely integrated with that. So you've got to make sure you've got the right partner for that. All right, I said one more polling question, so let me throw that up now and launch it. And this is a really easy one. Do you envisage widespread adoption? Yes or no? So I'll give you a little bit of time to vote on this. We won't give you too long, because I don't think that this is something that needs you to ponder over for an excessive amount of time. And Andrew, what do you think on this? I'm thinking we're going to get 100% of people say yes, absolutely. What do you think?
Yeah, I think of the two choices, I would say yes would be probably more likely.
Yes, I think we're brave putting this poll up if we think it's going to be anything different. But yeah, I think I can see the results as they come in. We're not at 100%. I don't think that really comes as a surprise to everybody, but we have got a heavy skew towards the yes side. So I'll only give you a little bit more time. I want to make sure that we have time for questions here as well. So I'm just going to close it down now and share the results, and there you go. 77% yes, 23% no. So just over 3 in 4 of you say, yep, this is the right thing for us. So expect the phone to be ringing off the hook, guys. This is going to be a very good growth for the use of Cardwall, and we're going to be able to make projects a lot more effective and efficient. All right, let me just wrap this up, and we can get to your questions. So this is the last of the panel questions that I have. For Hector, Andrew, and Barry. So Hector, again, let's start with you. What advice have you got for our audience? 3/4 of them, a little more than 3/4 of them, want to pursue this widespread adoption of cardboards, of Kanban. What are your tips, your secrets, your gotchas to avoid?
Yeah, I'd say the first one is to be flexible and receptive to change. And my meaning by that is that, the implementation of card walls or Kanban is not going to be perfect initially. So the idea is to continuously assess and improve. I think the other one too is to start small and then expand use later. So, begin with smaller initiative projects, gather your lessons learned, and then regroup, and then later increase or expound on how they're used. I think continued education and training, reinforcing what those teams or units have learned is important. And then to Andrew's point, finding that team that's had the most pain and it's had a win using card walls, using them as organizational advocates to kind of help promote their use.
Perfect, thank you. Barry, your thoughts?
I would say don't be afraid to have somebody take the lead And like I talked about a curator earlier, I'm also going to recommend longer term, somebody do some analysis of what's in there. Once your card wall gets pretty busy and populated with stuff, it becomes easy to, not be able to see the forest for the trees. So what I'm always doing with ours is I'll drop them out. We actually use 3 different technologies for this, and I'll just drop them out to Excel through their external interface and do some quick analysis in Power Pivot and just look for things that have gone stale, report back on what's getting stuck, what's moving, and just generally show the teams that we take seriously what they're doing and we're analyzing it and showing the respect that that they deserve for the time and effort they're putting into it. And like I said, that returns in multiples. They take it seriously and they continue to adopt over time as long as we do as leaders.
Excellent, thank you. Andrew, I'll let you have the last word on this.
Sure, well, I certainly agree with both Hector and Barry's suggestions. And the other thing I'd point to is defining what widespread adoption means for your organization. I've seen the most successful organizations look at tools like Cardwall and apply it to problems, knowing that it isn't the right tool for every single project. So getting understanding and defining what would we consider a success from an adoption standpoint, which is not going to be 100%, is a good place to start. The other component of this, when we talk about widespread adoption, and this is a little to Barry's point, is people on the ground need to be getting benefit from the card walls, but they need to see that leadership cares too, that it matters, that people are analyzing that information, using it to report out to the organization or to make decisions. That also helps drive some of the adoption, especially when somebody isn't fully convinced that it's fully beneficial to them, right? There needs to be some recognition that, oh, this is important to the organization, so I'm going to put more effort into it. And I would say too, and this is momentary advice, but with work from home, I don't think there's a better time to introduce this concept, because so many teams are struggling to manage their projects and their work, that this is a great thing that doesn't take a lot of brain power, a lot of training to add value. So creating a plan to go out and educate teams, train them on how to do this, maybe even coach them for several weeks through using a card wall for their weekly meetings. I think there's a huge opportunity right now to gain traction with this and add a lot of value.
Excellent, thank you. And I did promise that we'd have time for questions, so let me shift straight away into the questions. I apologize in advance, we're not going to have time to get to all the questions because there are a heck of a lot of them. I will get to as many as I can. A lot of you have been asking about software for card walls and Kanban. This webinar is being sponsored by Team Dynamics, and Team Dynamics has a card wall solution as part of their overall project and portfolio management solution. So Andrew, do you want to just talk briefly about that before we get into some of the other questions, because there are a lot of people asking about the software to do this?
Yeah, sure. So, I can talk within the context of our application. So each project, you create a project or a team, you can have one-to-many card walls. And so that group can leverage a single card wall if that suits them, or multiple, and they can be used alongside waterfalls. So we also see some projects where a certain portion of the project of the team, their use scenario is better supported by a card wall, and another might be better supported by waterfall. So I think looking for something where there's a hybrid approach is good. The other thing that I'd point to is looking at what type of information can be included. So you have tasks on projects, but what about work coming from your service management platform? That's one thing that we see a lot of our clients using, is being able to drag information and convert from a change ticket into a card, so I can manage it that way, because that's how my team works. So those are a couple considerations there, I think, and from our world that we've seen from our customer base, or where we've been driven by the market customers.
Excellent, thank you. All right, let's get into some of the business-focused questions. And Hector, a lot of people looking to leverage your experience, or you're going to take the lead on a lot of these, I'm afraid. Somebody's here saying Murray's asking, they're dealing with a lot of large-scale projects and looking for some advice or some tips as to how to organize a card wall for a large scale project, maybe even a program where there's many different streams of work and there could be dozens or more deliverables that are being worked on at any given point? How do you handle that in East Carolina University?
So we are a Team Dynamics school or user. So a lot of those larger initiatives, a lot of times we end up with kind of a hybrid type of approach where many of the streams of work may have an associated card wall, and then also your typical kind of waterfall plan. We try to base it, the development of the cards, on the life cycle of a project, and they're all different. And it's not typically what you see based on, the slide that you showed earlier, Andy, with your kind of, to do, doing, or be done type of categories. We try to make it very custom to the life cycle of that specific project. So for us, it depends on the initiative, obviously. A lot of times it is a hybrid approach, but it is very custom. We don't try to kind of create a tailored template that we apply to each initiative. And then it's also based on the PM, right, that's leading the initiative. If it's an internally managed type of project from the PMO, there are some obviously stricter guidelines on how we try to manage and define those card walls. But if it's outside within, the business units, they have a lot more freedom on how those are developed. Hopefully I answered your question, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. And somebody else mentioned about the not started, in progress, complete was more tailored to sort of a stakeholder view and was different to what that person had been taught when they went through some agile training. Yeah, the key here is to develop the columns or the swim lanes that work for you and your organization. There's no rules that say it has to be a certain way. Don't go out and Google for templates and just use those, because they might not work for your world. And the standard approach for your project might not be the right standard approach for somebody else's project in the same organization. So that's really key here. It makes it a lot easier when you're dealing with the software here, is you can sort of redefine and reconfigure those columns to what works for you. So I think that's a really important point. Okay, so now next question is just sort of specifically on the work in progress columns, Hector, and WIP limits. Someone was looking for guidance on how many activities should be allowed to be in progress, or where you should apply that limit. How many tasks could one person have, or how many tasks could the team have running in parallel? Do you have any sort of guidelines on that, or is that something else that varies a lot depending on the project and team?
Well, I think Barry can chime in, but I'll say it depends on the size of the team, but we haven't gotten to the point where it could be 1 for 1. So usually we try to say somewhere between 2 to 3, in some cases 4 to be the max.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, Barry, let me bring you in. I know you sort of would love to get to that 1-to-1, but what are you usually seeing?
Well, when I said 1, that obviously depends on the size of these things. And I think if you were handling, say, a large volume of IT requests, you're probably going to have some number naturally that you would do in a day. So it's going to be more than 1 on a card wall. But generally, I'm looking at this as plan out what we need to get through to the next review, and then some. And there's many times that's going to be 1 per person in my organization, and many times it's more. I'm just trying to be realistic and always start the next day with that same realistic look and saying, let's make sure we don't stack too much on any individual, because I do believe that affects their effectiveness throughout the day.
Yeah, I agree. Someone else is dealing here with a challenge that I'd hate to be in their position, I'll be honest. They're being asked by their leadership to migrate the entire organization to what they're calling Agile/Kanban while projects are in flight, and are looking to sort of get some guidance as to how to move in-flight projects into Kanban. So let me just sort of have a brief comment on this, and then I'll get Hector's views as well. I don't think we should necessarily just align Agile and Kanban. Kanban is a technique that is used in Agile quite a lot, but they are separate. You can be a Kanban user and not do any Agile project management. You can do Agile project delivery and not use Kanban if you really want to. So they are separate concepts. What I would say specifically to Kanban is there's no rules that say you have to do this at the start of a project. Sure, you can do that and everything starts on the left-hand side and then moves through, but you can create a picture using Kanban, an image of what's going on in your project at any point in time. So if you've got some things that are complete, they can go straight into there. If you've got some things that are in progress, they go straight into that area. You know, whatever those columns are, you can sort of provide that snapshot and then start managing it from that point forward. If you can start from the beginning, that's great, but the world doesn't stop while you figure out how to set up your Kanban. So Hector, I'm sure when you first started using card walls, you had projects that were in flight. Did you try and apply the concept to those projects, or did you start all of them from scratch?
Yeah, we just tried, basically what you just kind of articulated, we tried to just kind of base them on where they were in flight. We have small pockets that use Agile, but we mostly use the kind of the Kanban concepts, right? And a lot of people do get those two confused. They're not one and the same. And so we try to be very specific in when we're going into a unit to show them a card wall and how to use it, and getting them to adopt it. That it's not necessarily Agile, but it's a Kanban method or technique that allows you to use a board, right, to manage their work.
Excellent, thank you. I'll try and squeeze one or two more questions in. Got a couple of minutes before the top of the hour. Someone's asking about how you show priority. So if you've got a whole bunch of tasks that are in the backlog that haven't started yet, and some are obviously more important than others, how in a card wall or in Kanban would you show the priority of those different tasks? What do you do with that, Hector? And then I'll get Andrew and Barry to share their experiences.
Yeah, I think Andrew kind of pointed to it a little bit during the last question, but we use the color coding to help prioritize. And then we even use some of the, the prioritization comes with a certain type of color coding. And then we also go another step and use color coding for the identification of specific individuals, or maybe there's a team within a team that has very specific tasks that they're assigned to do. So we kind of leverage the color coding to help with that.
Yeah, which is obviously so much easier when you're dealing with software to manage this. You haven't got to go out there and try and find different color Post-it notes and then run out of one of them, or whatever it might be. Andrew, is that typically what people do?
Yeah, I think that different teams work different ways, but my thought is, what will the team or the organization buy into? What do people think is the right way to do it? And that tends to drive more adoption. So we see a combination, or either color coding, we've got this, this schema of color codes for priority, or a simple low to high, right? So you have low, medium, high, high, emergency, whatever that is. But as long as it's an agreed upon standard, I think that's okay. And to the last question, I did have a little bit of insight. A wholesale shift of all projects to Agile, I might suggest, and obviously I know very little about the context, but that could be fraught with more issues than it would actually solve. So one thing we've seen in the past with things like this that's successful is if a project is more than X percentage down the line, we're just going to finish it as is. We're going to start everything new in the new model. And if it's less than that percentage complete, we're going to evaluate whether we switch over from a waterfall model to an Agile model, etc. Because I think the effort to do that could be absolutely staggering, and it might cause more problems than it would fix.
Yeah, I agree. And just building on that further, I don't think there is an organization in the world that should be running every single project using waterfall, because it's not the right approach to every project, but neither should any organization in the world be running every project with Agile, because that's not the right approach either. All right, I wish we had time for more questions. We've got a ton of really good ones, including about estimating and durations and stuff, but we are right bang up to the top of the hour. And I did promise everybody the PDU information. So let me start by saying to Hector, to Andrew, to Barry, thank you so much for sharing your insights with the audience. I really appreciate it, and I know they do. And the level of engagement has been phenomenal with this webinar. To the audience, thank you so much for joining. And the information that you need for the PDU is that this is a self-reported PDU. So go to the PMI website, go to the CCRS section where you report all of your PDU information, and you are entitled to claim one PDU in the technical project management category for this webinar. and enter that in, and everything will be great. So thank you everybody for joining us. Please join us again for the next webinar soon. Obviously, we have a fairly captive audience right now, so lots of webinars, lots of really great content for everybody. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Bye now.